Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Glenorchy City Council on Tuesday, 26th of April 2022. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Palawa people as the traditional owners and ongoing custodians of this land on which we meet, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. I'm Beck Thomas, Mayor of Glenorchy and Chairperson of tonight's council meeting. Joining me here in council chambers is Alderman Kelly Sims, Alderman Peter Ball, Alderman Angela Ryan, Alderman Dan Dunsby, Deputy Mayor Stephen King, General Manager Tony McMullen, Alderman Gay Richardson, Alderman Simon Fraser, Alderman Melissa Carlton and Alderman Sue Hickey. We also have a number of council directors and officers relevant to items on tonight's agenda here in chambers with us, and welcoming members of the public back this evening. So welcome back to members of the public tonight. We note that tonight's meeting is being live streamed to Facebook and online, so we welcome our online audience tonight as well, and note that obviously anyone who speaks at tonight's meeting will be live streamed. Glenorchy City Council takes workplace health and safety seriously, and this includes physical and psychological safety. We have a duty to ensure that a safe workplace is provided for our employees, elected members, contractors, volunteers and members of the public who are present at council's workplaces. Council meetings form part of council's workplace, and it is expected that everyone who attends council meetings will behave in a polite and respectful manner, refrain from using offensive language or making personal statements, and not be aggressive, threatening or speak in a hostile manner. Any disagreement should be expressed respectfully, and during debate and in decision making, we must remember we are elected to represent and serve the people of Glenorchy and to make our city the best it can be. Further to this, in line with council meeting rules, comments will be turned off for all online streams. It's not acceptable for members of the audience here in chambers to call out their opinions when they attend meetings in person, so it's logical, with streaming being our virtual chambers, that the same rules apply to participation online. We have 18 items on our agenda this evening, and item 1 is apologies. We have no apologies this evening. It's great to have everyone here and back in person for this council meeting. Item 2 is confirmation of the minutes of the open meeting. So we have a motion that the minutes of the council meeting held on 28th of March 2022 be confirmed. Do I have someone to move this recommendation? Moved Alderman Ball, seconded. Deputy Mayor. Any discussion of the minutes, Alderman Ball?
Nothing, thank you.
No? Any other discussion of the minutes? No? Nothing to close debate. Alderman Ball?
No, thank you.
I will put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are for. That's carried unanimously. Item 3 is announcements by the Chair. There are none this evening. Item 4 is pecuniary interest notification. Does any alderman have any pecuniary interest, or any staff have any pecuniary interest on any items on tonight's agenda? None. Thank you. Moving on to item 5, response to previous public questions taken on notice. There are a number of responses to questions there. 5 questions in relation to the disposal of land from Janice Bryan of Montrose. We have some answers to questions from Russell Yaxley in relation to Tolosa Dam and play spaces. Some answers to questions from Shane Alderton in relation to the relocation of the BMX track. And that is all for responses to previous questions taken on notice. Moving on to item 6, public question time. We have some questions that were received on notice from Mr. Eddie Steenbergen in relation to audit panel and GPA delegations. 4 questions there that have been responded to, with the answers being provided in the agenda there. Some questions on notice from Janice Bryan in relation to council support for youth programs, BMX relocation, skate park development, the YMCA and Glenorchy historical records. And again, the answers to those questions are detailed in the agenda papers. And we have some questions also, again, from Mr. Eddie Steenbergen in relation to McGill Rise and YMCA Glenorchy, which we have taken on notice, and we'll provide an answer in writing, Mr. Steenbergen, by the 3rd of May. Thank you for those questions. And a question from Tegan George in relation to hooning and dangerous driving in Glenorchy, again that we've taken on notice and will provide a response to in writing by the 3rd of May. Are there any other questions for public question time from members of the public? Mr. Alderton, would you like to come forward? You remember this process? It's been a while.
Yes, it's been a while. So for the members of the public watching on Facebook and other platforms this evening, my name's Shane Alderton of Austin's Ferry, and I have a number of questions I'd like to ask council tonight. The first question through you, Mayor, is in relation to a question that Russell Yaxley asked. I also have a keen interest on council's projects and infrastructure, and the response that you gave, Mr. Yaxley, to question 1, is there any update or progression for the Taswater regarding the renewal and regeneration of the Closer Street Dam and Parkland? The answer was, and I've been waiting with great anticipation for this announcement, that you'll be making a public announcement early in April 2022. I've not been made aware or seen any public announcement. Are you in a position to update on why that hasn't occurred? Or?
Absolutely, yes. We did anticipate that we would be able to make an announcement in early April. Our negotiations and collaboration with Taswater has been taking a little longer around our communications that we'll be doing jointly on that. And you've got the scoop here. We expect to be making an announcement on Friday. So. Okay. Stay tuned.
Excellent. So the end of the month. Very good. So the other questions I have tonight also relate to infrastructure. And I noticed Jan Bryant asked one about the skate park, and it was fantastic. We got a commencement date for that. I was just wondering, I've driven past Giblin Street Reserve a number of times, and we've had an awful long process in changing the grant deeds, seeking approval from council to get the Giblin Street play space up and running. I'm just wondering when we're going to see a commencement date for that, Mayor.
Absolutely, thank you. So we have now gone to tender on the Giblin Reserve Play Space project. So the tender's out for response right now, and I'll just might defer to the General Manager. Do you know when that closes, or has that closed, General Manager?
I'll just check with our Acting Director of Infrastructure and Works, Patrick Marshall.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know it's been extended for 3 weeks due to the Easter period. So
okay. Okay, so once we have received tenders for it, we'll go through the required procurement process to select the successful tenderer, and we will have a project plan for delivery of that project very soon after that date. So.
Okay, excellent. So the follow-up questions I'm going to ask you now about the skate park play space and the Giblin Street play space. I guess you'll have to take the Giblin Street one on notice in light of what you just told me, that you haven't actually received and got a successful tender, correct? Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah. So my 2 questions relating to both those play spaces are, from the point that this council sat and met and approved both of these play spaces to go ahead, and they were costed and budgeted for, you may be able to answer this question, in regards to the skate park, Montrose skate park play space, has the estimated costs due to the time frame that's occurred increased at all in relation to what the costs that were budgeted for at the time that council sought costings for this project and council, you the Alderman, actually approved? So by the time you deliver this project, because it's taken a considerable period of time, does council anticipate a blowout in costs?
Yeah, thank you. In relation to the skate park, I might defer that again to you, General Manager.
So the situation with the skate park is that we had to do some redesign because of underlying infrastructure on that site. So the skate park was reorientated, and I'll just again check with our Acting Director in relation to the budgetary impact of that.
yeah, I'd have to take that notice, I think. Tony?
Yeah.
All right. And the same question you'll obviously need to take on notice in regards to Giblin Street. So basically I'm asking the same question. Has the anticipated costs now blown out in relation to the estimated costs that were voted and agreed upon when the project was approved by the Alderman at the council meeting?
Take that one on notice too.
All right. That's all the questions I have. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Alderton. Any further questions on notice in public question time? No? Okay, moving on to item 7, petitions or addressing a council meeting through deputation. I understand, General Manager, we have none.
There are none, Mayor.
None, no, thank you. Moving on then to item 8. At activities of the Mayor, and we have a recommendation that Council receive the report about the activities of Mayor Thomas during the period Saturday 19th of March to Tuesday 19th of April. Have someone to move this recommendation, please. Alderman Ball, seconded Deputy Mayor. Alderman Ball.
Thank you, Mayor. There was one that just, if I could ask you, on Tuesday, the 22nd of March, you met with the Vice-Chancellor, Rufus Black and Kate Huntington from Utas. Can you just enlighten us what that was about?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Alderman Ball. We met with them at the request of the Vice-Chancellor, who wanted the opportunity to brief us on the proposed relocation of Utas into the Hobart City. And General Manager, that was the main purpose of the meeting. We did
Yes,
also
that's
talk
correct.
about some recreation projects that are happening in our city, and sort of ask the question, I guess, as to whether there's any desire or plans going forward for Utas to have a presence even further south in our municipality of Glenorchy, noting that that would be very welcomed by our council and community. Yeah. So certainly they didn't give an indication that there were any plans in place for that, but certainly pleased to hear that we would be receptive to that. And I talked to them particularly around opportunities potentially around the Cosgrove High redevelopment with the sport and recreation focus, and even maybe the YMCA. So we sort of provided some linkages there that might provide potential for discussion.
Thank you. I also would like to compliment you on the yesterday with Anzac Day, and noticed you were very resplendent in your new gown, but may I ask what the cost to the council was for that?
That's a very good question, Alderman Bull, and I can't answer it off the top of my head. I'm sorry. Might have to take that one on notice.
Right, thank you.
Thank you for your compliment.
No, I thought it was great, and I thought the guest speaker was excellent.
Yes, absolutely. Any further discussion of this item? Alderman Dunsby.
I'm just wondering if you could tell us about your meeting with Captain Kim Howard, please, from the Salvation Army.
Yes, sure. So Marina and I met with Captain Kim Howarth from the Salvation Army. She's the state commander, and we've been meaning to catch up for a while, really, just to talk about our collaboration with the Salvation Army here in Glenorchy. We catch up with, obviously, with Captains Jeff and Jackie Milkins quite regularly, but not so much with the state commander, and we wanted to talk to her about some of the work that we've been doing at council around CBD safety. And how we can work together more collaboratively on the street teams and other potential opportunities to work together to improve that CBD safety. So it was really a meet and greet, a catch up, just to sort of brief her on what we're doing at council and some of the issues that we experience in our CBD, which she is aware of through her conversations with our local core officers who do a fantastic job, but really to hear it from our perspective as well. Any further discussion of the item? No? Back to you, Alderman Ball.
Nothing further, thank you.
With the recommendation to the vote, please raise your hand to indicate if you're for. It's carried unanimously. Moving on to item 9, Cityscape Civic Heart Master Plan. We have a recommendation that council approve the Cityscape Civic Heart Master Plan to provide a strategic framework for urban development of Glenorchy Civic Heart. Have someone to move this recommendation, please. Alderman Richardson, thank you. Someone to second. Deputy Mayor, Alderman Richardson.
Thank you, Mayor. I welcome this master plan. How often do you find it frustrating that you can't get a cup of coffee and meet with somebody after 5:30 of a night? I know I have. We have buildings that are over 60 years old. They have served our community well, but are now outdated, and we've outgrown them. It's time for a modern precinct that will not just meet the needs of the people in Glenorchy, but also the wider community. To achieve this, you need a vision. This plan has been put together in consultation with the community. It provides a roadmap to achieving a dynamic civic centre and brings the heart of the CBD to life. It includes accessibility to health, government and community services. It's designed to stimulate jobs and economic growth, enhance urban and event spaces, complements the northern suburbs transit corridor with a new Boss Mall, underground car parks, walking and bike tracks, and garden with over 200 trees. I love the idea. For a vision to be realised, it will need significant investment from the state and federal government, we realise that, but you need a starting point, and this is the starting point. So I am more than happy to support the master plan, and I can't wait for it to be realised.
Thank you, Alderman Richardson. Any further discussion on the item? Alderman Hickey.
Yes, look, I think some of it's a little fanciful, but I do think we do need some sort of plan out there because we do have a much rundown, dilapidated city heart, which I think is quite tragic. So it's good to have some sort of plan out there for aspirational businesses who may want to develop it to come in and have a look at the plan. But I just have a couple of concerns. Like, this is a very, very expensive report, as they all are. And it's things like, it is estimated that between 2016 and 2036, there will be 1,428 additional jobs in Glenorchy CBD. That's a 20-year timeline. We're only going to get 1,428 additional jobs. And bear in mind, it's now 2022. So where their data's coming from, and they're aging it back to 2016, surely they could have told us what percentage of the 1,428 have either got jobs, and we've now going to be expecting another 1,000, or I don't understand why they can just make a statement like that. The other thing too is I hope we are not going to be making decisions on our Let's Talk Glenorchy platform, because as I've said before, I know it's the only thing we can afford and it's a limited thing, but with, we get these bizarre statistics that come out of that thing, that 62% strongly support or support some aspects of it. But, when you're talking 62% of 500 people, it's hardly a valid sample for Glenorchy. So, look, I'm glad there's a conceptual sort of talk out there. It is a starting point for people to start considering what a really flash Glenorchy could look like. But seriously, by 2036, we could be amalgamated, we could be anything. So I'm not rubbishing it. I think every city should have some kind of vision for the future, which I think this city has probably lacked, and consequently we've had this sort of ramshackle development in the very heart of the city. So I don't think there's anything apart from St Matthew's Church that is heritage of real meaningful value. Certainly not this building, but then there'd be people who'd be supportive of 1960s architecture. So anyway, that's just my views, and I'm not going to go against it, but I don't think it's going to happen for a very long time if we're relying on people to invest in it.
Thank you, Alderman Hickey. Any further discussion? Alderman Fraser.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, look, I also am happy to endorse the master plan. I also acknowledge that it's not without its critics, as was obvious from some of the public consultation and the report we have in our attachments. But as this vision becomes a reality over the next few decades, I would suspect some changes and adjustments will be made to the original design. I think that master plan is a pretty core function of the council. You've got to walk and chew gum, so to speak. You've got to be renewing and upgrading and maintaining current assets, but you've also got to have an eye to the future and try to envision what the city is going to look like in 10, 20 years' time. And Glenorchy will look quite different in 10, 15, 20 years' time. We know that our demographics are going to change. We're going to have an increased population, denser living. There's going to be technological advances that we can't even imagine at the moment. And the way we move around is probably going to change radically as well. So, it is important that I think the council has some sort of vision for this block, which does form the civic heart of our city. And the civic heart is important. It is important as a focal point for Glenorchy residents. The other point I think worth making here is that for many people, the Glenorchy CBD is not a particularly attractive place to be at the moment. And certainly would hope that with an investment of this size, this sort of design, it will go some way to changing the culture that we currently have in the CBD as well, which I think would be a great thing for our city.
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Sims.
Yeah, I just have a few points to raise. I'm in support of providing a more responsible and proactive framework for Glenorchy CBD strategic urban development in promotion of activity, but in promotion of lots of other activity as well in regards to focusing on youth and some of the social issues that we're facing at the moment. But I'm concerned that this framework doesn't meet our city's growing and future needs, both environmentally and economically. Upon review and for reflection, it's arguably very poor timing to announce and invest resources into such a priority directly after the CBD revitalisation endeavour, for lack of a better word. I also think we should consider our own views versus undertakings. As a council in principle, for example, we've stated in the report in item 13 for our submission to the Future of Local Government review, one of the points notes on behalf of council that another area of difficulty for local government is the receipt of unsolicited capital grants, often flowing from election periods. On the face of it, these windfall cash injections appear to be a bonanza. However, grants often require significant co-contribution, which imposes further budget stress and diverts funding effort away from renewal and existing assets and towards new upgrades and works. So this in itself should act as a bit of a warning, I think, to these types of master plans that we're investing in, and you know, we should be reviewing and comparing the outcomes from the past ones as well before jumping into them. And I think we need to be doing it regularly in accordance with the community input and needs. And I feel like the feedback I've received from the community that that's lacking. And that will change as well because it is such a long timeline. The whole scope of Glenorchy will change. It's changed quite a lot in a very short period of time with the injection of Mona. So that's only the start of it, I think. So I think, you know, it kind of appears to be a take something or take nothing approach. And that's how I feel as an alderman sometimes, voting on some of the items. It's either vote for it or not, and I'd rather vote for something than nothing. And I think the community and a lot of the community groups feel that way. For example, the BMX group, who I've spoken to since seeing some of the reports, and the feedback I've received directly from them, and people who represent the bowls club and things like that, football clubs, lots of community groups have a very different version and explanation for their support for some of these projects. They feel it's an all or nothing approach. So in saying that and weighing up the risk versus benefits, I'm very torn around this and supporting this, another master plan, another thing. But although it is something that my values and professionalism think is something very important that we should have. So in saying that, I am in two minds about it. And I'm in two minds about the actual looking at the design and the scope around environmental and climate change and the amount of concrete and things like that. That's very concerning for a lot of the environmental groups I've spoken with as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Sims. Any further discussion of the item? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. And I too am in support of this as a vision, as a starting point for the community. It is a living document, and it's a starting point to try and improve and grow and do what will make this community, this city, a much better place. And it's not going to happen overnight. We know that. It's going to take a lot of change. I've had people concerned as well, concerned about the amount of concrete and things like that. And that's great that they're concerned, because that means the community is getting involved and will continue to participate. As I said to people, this is not locked in. There's a lot of water to go under the bridge, an absolute flood to go under the bridge before we go too far down the track with this. But it's a starting point. In every goal, every vision starts with a thought bubble, and this is a bit bigger than a thought bubble. So here we go. Let's see how we go with it.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any further discussion? Alderman Carlton.
Thank you, Mayor. I am in support of the recommendations that we have before us tonight. I take on board Alderman Sims' comments and our Deputy Mayor's comments about feedback regarding trees and the greening of that space, and I hope that that feedback will be taken on board as we go into the more finite design process. I've also supported quite a few other master plans over the last 12, 18 months. We've looked at plans for different precincts such as Moona. We've looked at plans for Claremont as well as the maritime area as well. So there's a lot of great vision and a lot of great plans out there. My concern is around the available funding. So we know with each of these, council itself doesn't necessarily have the funds to realise this. I do note in this particular master plan that a significant amount of the development will actually be other users and aligning their plans with what this vision sort of sets out. So it's not necessarily something that council is going to need to fund, but it does rely on state and federal government, but so do all of our other master plans. So I just, I'm happy to see it, but just realistic around what we already have out there in terms of master plans and future decisions around prioritising some of that against what we already know is a difficult financial situation for council once we start adding more to our asset base. So really supportive of the vision, but in the back of my mind, there are a lot of different visions that we do have. So how we manage that going forward, I think, is going to be the key.
Thank you. Thank you, Alderman Carlton. Any further discussion of the item? No, well, I really appreciate the considered debate and discussion around the table, and I too, like Alderman Richardson, I think this is a really important visionary document for us as a city going forward. Remembering we are a city really close to our capital city, and it's important that as we have more growth and development through our city, our municipality as a whole, that we are keeping up the standard, I guess, of services and facilities, particularly within our CBD centre, given we are, you know, the CBD that is just second from our capital city. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So it's really important that we are being future focused. But as Alderman Carlton alluded to, it's really important that we balance that with delivery of our services, you know, on the ground that we know are so important to our community as well. So we have, through our economic recovery program, which we borrowed money from the state government through the interest-free loan for, through COVID stimulus funding, we have had the opportunity through that funding to develop a number of master plans, being really future focused for our city. And that was a really important opportunity for us to take up, because we know that we need to focus our ratepayers' money and the investment they make every single year in the services on the ground that matter to them. So that loan money really enabled us to do this important planning that we otherwise perhaps wouldn't have had capacity to do, and would have left councils of the future and our community of the future in the lurch in not having had these aspirational visions. So I just wanted to make note that in reference to where, you know, how this was made possible through the COVID stimulus projects and our economic recovery program. Also noting importantly that this and other master plans were identified as priorities for council through our economic development strategy that we launched back in 2020, early 2020. Yes, I'm getting some notes. Early 2020, just prior to being hit by COVID, we endorsed the first economic development strategy that we've had as a city for, I believe, 30 years. So, you know, that's important that we're recognising, again, being a city adjacent to our capital city, that we need to be planning for development and growth, business and commercial development and growth through our CBD. In relation to some of the points that have been made around the table, also by Alderman Carlton, in relation to capacity to deliver and implement, it is a valid point that it is going to, implementation of this master plan and our other master plans is going to be reliant on investment by private partners and by other levels of government, and that's the reality for local governments all across Tasmania and across the country, and perhaps even the world, with master plans like this, is that it takes partnership investment, and certainly that's a point that is important to our ratepayers to acknowledge, that it will take that investment and it will take time to achieve that working together. In relation to the consultation with the community, I know Alderman Hickey talked about the response that we've had through our Let's Talk Glenorchy engagement platform and how we have this continual struggle to get engagement from community members. But as I said before, prior to being an alderman, I probably wouldn't have provided comment on a Cityscape Civic Art Master Plan either. So I think we must remember that we are elected to make these decisions on behalf of the community, and whilst we welcome their feedback and need to provide considerable opportunity for that, ultimately we've got to accept that they won't always have capacity or the interest to provide it. I do also know that the project team worked quite closely with a lot of the stakeholders who make up the footprint that is reflected through the master plan, all the services that would be encompassed within the footprint that is our CBD, our Civic Heart. If you look at the Paranacle Centre in Devonport, I think it provides a good example of what's been achieved through a master plan such as this and through a funding partnership, and I guess that's what we can aspire to achieve in the future. So I too am happy to support this master plan, noting again, reiterating that it will take time and partnership funding to deliver. Any further discussion of the item? Go back to the mover, Alderman Richardson.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to add that this is a visionary document. It has been on the drawing board, I believe, 8 years, since 2014. So there will be changes as we go along the way, subject to circumstances. That's the norm with projects, but I welcome it and I'm happy to go to the vote.
Thank you, Alderman Richardson. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you're for. It's carried unanimously. Moving on to item 10, organisational direction setting. And we have recommendations that Council direct the General Manager to immediately begin project planning for a review of Council services to be undertaken in parallel with the forthcoming review of Council's strategic plan to better focus services on community priorities and improve Council's financial sustainability, and direct the General Manager to prepare a project business case for the review of Council services for submission to the May 2022 Ordinary Council meeting to enable Council to set the terms of reference for the review and to make appropriate budgetary provision for it. So I have someone to move this recommendation, please.
So moved.
Alderman Fraser, someone to second. Alderman Ryan. Alderman Fraser.
Thank you, Mayor. The time right. Yeah, look, as you might expect, I will be supporting the General Manager's recommendations here. And I do agree with his assessment that this is something that should be considered more broadly in the strategic plan of the council, and I certainly understand his recommendation for that and fully support that as well. I do think in the meantime we need to some low-hanging fruit. If we can find some low-hanging fruit to save some money in the council's budget, that is also really important for us to consider at the moment. But I think, you know, a bit of context setting here is important. I know that the General Manager has indicated in his report that, you know, this is really the catalyst for this is automatic feedback. But it's not just feedback from us. I mean, there are some glaring economic statistics out there that are publicly available to everyone. We know that people's household incomes are not rising as fast as inflation at the moment, so effectively their spending power is decreasing and they are becoming poorer, essentially. So that's part of the context in which we're setting this budget. We also know from data that's been publicly released in 2021, and I'm assuming it's perhaps even worse now, that we have about 5,500 households in our municipality who are suffering from mortgage stress. 5,500, that's almost half of the households in our municipality. And of course, we know that within the next 3 years, predictions are that interest rates are going to go up by 3%. So that mortgage stress is only going to get worse. And of course, there's stress as well. So yes, as the General Manager also mentioned in the report, that we do have the second lowest rating level of all the urban councils, but in my opinion, that's probably appropriate because Glenorchy has lower levels of household income than other urban areas, and we have more disadvantage than many other urban councils as well. So I think that our current rating levels are somewhat commensurate with the socio-economic status of our community. TasCosts has also alerted us to the fact that people across Tasmania are experiencing extreme cost of living pressures right now, and there's across the board whole raft of things that people buy on a daily and weekly basis are rising by huge amounts: petrol, groceries, etc. So yes, we need to balance those pressures, the pressures of the people that pay rates, with the reality that the community still want our council to deliver services to them as well. And of course, the council is operating in an environment where its costs have been subject to rapid inflation. So it is a real conundrum. It is a conundrum. But the other context here, of course, is that the council over the past 10 years has raised rates by 47%, which is well above CPI. Now, of course, there is some context there. About a decade ago, I think it was about a decade ago that with the Taswater, the creation of Taswater, the council lost a lot of revenue that was important to its budget, and that really it's only getting back to that point now. But again, only 4 years ago when we were first elected, we had a 12.5% rate rise, 12.5%, which is really, looking back on it now, was an extraordinarily large one-off rate rise, and we've had a series of those over the last 10 years. And that with that rate rise, our hope was that this council would be back on a sustainable financial footing. And unfortunately, 4 years later, we are back here in the same situation again. And, that's not all within the council's control. There are many things that have been unexpected that have come along. But I think that, I know that the General Manager describes them as shocks, but many of the things that have hurt the council's budget, I would not describe as shocks. I would describe them as poor decision making. And I think that we're still suffering from the effects of historically poor financial decision making. So, I don't think it's good enough that we go back to the Glenorchy community and ask for above CPI rate rises. At the moment, our long-term financial management plan has a decade of 3.5% rate rises. That's if you add that to the 47% rate rises they've already had, that's an extraordinary inflation in the rates they've been paying over that time. So I think the time has come really for the council to be prepared to change, to adapt, to rationalise some services, and to look seriously at how the organisation could do things better. And I think I'm of the opinion that if we as aldermen don't put that pressure on the organisation and simply keep allowing the council to reach out to the community for higher rate revenue rises, then it won't ever happen. I mean, this is our core responsibility, to put this pressure back on the organisation. It does create an element of stress. I completely understand that, and I have full confidence in the General Manager's ability to handle that with dexterity. But all organisations need to change. It is a reality. In the last 8 years, I've been through 3 restructures where I work at the university. Hydro Tasmania went through a fairly significant restructure last year. The Department of Communities is going through a restructure. So change is the reality that all organisations need to get used to. And if they don't, unfortunately, generally speaking, they die. They cease to exist. So I think that being able to manage some of the stress that comes out of these sort of decisions is the work of adaptive leadership. And this is now time, this is the type of leadership we need from our General Manager. This is the type of leadership we need from our executive leadership team.
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. Alderman Hickey.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to state that governance has always been a real passion of mine. As many people would know, I've had over a decade of experience in local government. So you can imagine the number of reports that I have read during this time. And local government is no different to any other tier of government. It is very much, yes, Minister, in that the real control is in the hands of the bureaucracy. The Local Government Act expects we as elected officials to set the strategic focus for this council and for the efficient and responsible management of this city and for its assets now and into the future. We are directed to obtain professional officer advice in all of our decisions, and tonight we are reviewing such a document. In my personal view, this report that we've been presented with is written with the authority of a masterclass in how to write a report that says a lot about nothing and basically delays structural reform yet again. It gets a higher distinction for its textbook language of bureaucratic babble, with page 40 of the council papers before me, this side, stating, and I quote, "I move to more tightly constrain the scope of services offered by this council would run counter to the trends in local government." And I'm stopping the quote here because that quote is actually maintaining that the current acceptance of local government to accept the cost shifting from other levels of government. So we're running non-core businesses. And I know there's a bit of debate that there is no such thing as non-core and core, and yet in our financial report, we refer to core functions. So for the lack of clarity there, I'm still going to refer to it as core and non-core. This is regardless of whether or not we can afford these business units, whether we're even equipped to do them well, or whether the private sector with which we are competing in each of these cases could actually provide a better outcome for everyone who uses these services. Once again, this council is being asked to not address these costly issues despite me raising them at every single opportunity I have had since I've been elected, and to put them off until A, we do the next review of the council's strategic plan, which will be after the next election, so months away. B, put them off until we get new aldermen elected, who will probably take considerable time to get up to speed with how a council functions. And C, maybe even put them off until after the state government's latest attempt to review the status of local government and its viability. In other words, in this report, the General Manager is asking this council to delay in putting in place immediately true cost centres around non-core functions of this council, whilst we continue to bleed financially. We are unable to meet our obligations to our community for better footpaths, for better roads, for better sports grounds and for better playgrounds. And I'm not just annoyed about this report, I'm really annoyed, in case you haven't got my feeling, that this council has not had these true cost centres in place, not just in the time that I've been elected and been asking for them, but for the whole past term of this council and for the decades before. I mean, this is poor governance and poor business. So despite numerous requests, we still do not have any idea of if the non-core section of council, these non-core section business units, are using 5% of IT resources each week, maybe 25% of human resources costs per week, 15% of risk management per week, or 10% of workplace and health safety per week. And that's ridiculous. They could all put in an allocation of what time they've allocated, let alone gardening or maintenance costs that might be relevant to these standalone little units. We don't know because we've been told we cannot afford to resource the $70,000 quoted to us to have this worked out. Whilst we are confronted with a minimum stated loss of almost $200,000 on just one of those business units alone, and that is without being told of all the other additional costs that have not been allocated. We've been told that we are paying additional super entitlements to staff in a comparative business to the private sector. that we just make a book entry at the end of the year to meet our competitive neutrality obligations when we're not charging rent or other costs. Apart from lacking transparency, due diligence, and investigating the cost benefits or the opportunity costs for this exercise, this is happening on my watch. I promised everyone when I was elected that I would do my best to hold this council to account, but I'm afraid it has been almost impossible. So in this report, it talks about aldermen asking for a review of childcare. The report states this is largely funded by Commonwealth subsidies and parental fees, and the Jobs Hub being funded by the state government. I'm all for jobs, I'm all for childcare, it's just whether or not we should be doing them. Yet over all these months, I have been unable to find out if the first 200 people that have been allocated a job have stayed in the job, turned up on day one, were still there a week later, or are still there, where they've just been given several chances at jobs. These are basic statistics we need to know when we are giving free rent, putting in staff costs to fund this body. It's just cost shifting. We also have private sector businesses out there in the same space. This report also states, I love this bit, the risks identified in this report are, this is if we go ahead immediately, unanticipated costs, community backlash, failure to meet objectives, damage to morale and productivity, brand damage, compliance issues, inappropriate timing and inconsistency with strategy. Give me strength. What are the risks of not addressing these issues immediately? Oh, let me have a think about that. Unanticipated costs, community backlash, failure to meet objectives, damage to morale, productivity, brand damage, compliance issues, inappropriate timing and inconsistency with our strategy. In the risk table, it says, the adopted measures are ill-timed relative to the council's electoral cycle because we should ensure that key decisions are made post-election to enable better quality decision-making in clear air. I have been on this council since July of last year. I find this statement to be an absolute insult to the integrity of all of us around this table in that we cannot be trusted to not make this political, that we can't address the costs of this council now or 6 months ago or at any stage. Instead, we're being asked to put off this important inquiry to the financial stability of this council and give the headache to a new elected body. Pass the buck, kick the can down the road and wait to see if we get more compliant group of aldermen who won't ask tough questions. As it says in the report, the council's financial position continues to be challenging, which is a nice way to put it, as it has been for more than a decade. At a recent budget workshop, we were given fluffy statements of the importance of some of council's activities, but each one was followed with, we do not have the resources to provide the true costs at this time.
Alderman Hickey, I just need to interrupt you there. Sorry, are you winding up?
Yes, can I ask for an additional 3 minutes, please? Well, I won't need that long, I'll need a minute.
Yeah, sure, go on for another minute.
Well, actually, I might need more than that,
Well,
particularly if I'm getting loud. Is that all right?
you could see, like to seek a leave of absence from the council for an additional 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you.
That is the motion, General Manager, or do I just have to
Seeking an extension, just an extension.
I'll just clarify. There, it's.
I think you have to get
Permission of the chair.
Yeah.
Or just says seeking leave for the council. Yeah, I'm prepared to authorise that. Will you continue?
Thank you. Is there ever a good time to find resources for this council? Surely it is now, immediately. This is not a game of Monopoly where we should not pass go. We need to just do it, just get on with it. I personally believe that we have the skills in-house. We have some excellent staff who would be able to do an immediate desktop audit, but I am very conscious of putting any more pressure on staff that are currently suffering from having a lot of positions not filled to make the budget look better. So I'm reluctant to put it back on them. And then in summary, I am hoping that Alderman Fraser will consider this. The recommendation for us is 1, direct the General Manager to immediately begin project planning for a review of council services to be undertaken in parallel with the forthcoming review of council's strategic plan And 2, to direct the general manager, which sounds like master and servant, I don't really like that, to prepare a project business case for the review of council services for submission to the May 2022 Ordinary Council meeting to enable council to set terms of reference for review and to make appropriate budgetary provision for it, which will necessitate another time-wasting report. On that basis, I believe this is an issue so important, I wish to move an amendment, and as you know, I rarely do those, because this cannot be delayed until a new council is up to speed. And we should not wait until another strategic plan is done, because the strategic plan should be based on what we can afford to do, not what we want to do. So if we don't know the cost, what's the point of doing all the work on the strategic plan? So I would like to pass this amendment, and I hope the council will support it. It's basically what the general manager put, except it's 1, direct the general manager to immediately begin the project planning for a comprehensive review of council services, and strike out all words that follow that. 2, direct the general manager to prepare a business case, project business case, for the review of council services for submission to the May 2022 Ordinary Council meeting, which includes, so this is the change, which includes suggested terms of reference for review to speed it up, not wait for us to offer them, and which advises the council of the appropriate budgetary provision for it. So in other words, the general manager has over a month to get that figure of a quote in that time. Otherwise, we will be another 2 months down the track with doing nothing. So that is the amendment I would like to put.
Thank you, Alderman Hickey. Just consult the general manager on the wording of that, whether Bryn, you captured that last bit in particular.
Yes, you're going to speak to that amendment then?
No.
Mayor, can I just
Don't you dare,
can I just
yes.
clarify?
Sure.
So the intent of sub-recommendation 2 is to do just that.
It doesn't read like that though, and it has no time frame or emergency around it.
Clearly, every report that council considers has a recommendation from staff, and to set the terms of reference, I would need to provide a recommendation from staff. To set the appropriate budgetary provision, I'd need to provide some recommendations around.
But aren't you able to do that in the same report? That's what I'm saying. So it gets condensed in next month's report.
Sorry, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Yes.
Right, well, it didn't read like that to me. So I just want emergency. I want urgency.
Yes, we understand.
Good.
So therefore, would you be satisfied to leave recommendation 2 as it is, given the general manager's clearly articulated that is the intent, is to provide what you're asking for in that May report, in that he would be recommending terms of reference for the council to endorse?
Well, if that is the intention, I'll accept it. It isn't how I read it, but I'm happy to accept 2 as it is. Just change 1.
Yep, so 1, your suggested amendment is direct the general manager to immediately begin project planning for a review of council services, full stop.
Yeah, so that we're not saying it has to be undertaken in parallel with the forthcoming review of council's strategic plan, which puts it off for many, many months.
Yep, so you're suggesting that it should be commenced immediately,
Yes.
noting that we don't have a budget allocation for that in this financial year.
Well, we have this unique situation where we are prepared to sit by and watch wasteful sections of this council's enterprise continue to go, because we won't sit down, even if we do a desktop audit, and revise what the costs are. So it has to start now. And even if that means where you go out and get a consultant, do it now.
Sure. So that is, I would consider that to not be a major amendment, therefore would perhaps be one that could be put forward as at the approval of the mover and seconder.
I'm happy to approve that. I agree with the sense of urgency.
Actually, I have another suggestion. In number 1, after the second comma, to leave in the rest of the sentence, because it focuses the purpose of the review.
Yes.
So take out the middle bit to be undertaken in parallel with the forthcoming review of council's strategic plan. Take out that,
Yep.
but leave in the next bit.
Yep, to better focus services on community priorities and improve council's financial sustainability.
Yep, that's acceptable.
You
Yes.
need the word better in there or just to focus? I mean,
Oh, well, I think it's fine, to better focus. So we'd just be removing to be undertaken in parallel with the forthcoming review of council's strategic plan. And if the mover's happy with that, the second is happy with that,
I'm happy with that.
okay? Consider that the motion being debated. Thank you, Alderman Hickey. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Sims.
Look, after reading the report, and I know there'd been a bit of to and fro with the GM and Alderman around what is core business, who should be outlining and just handpicking core business, whether that should be done by Alderman in a workshop or on a whim, or whether it should be something a bit more measured and balanced. And it got me really thinking about those terminologies of core business and non-core business and all of that jazz. I know we work with a lot of legislation and governance in early childhood that is predominantly models and principles and regulations and guides that go with it if you don't understand the regulations and the interpretation. So things like that. And I think although under the Act, the key terminology for council business isn't explicitly interpreted as core or non-core services in this report, we've always used these terms to interpret the Act and undertake our work up until today. These terms are a convenient shorthand for functions considered to either be necessary or discretionary. Division 2, Section 20 of the Local Government Act states that the function and powers are to provide for the health and safety and welfare of the community, to represent and promote the interests of the community, to provide for the peace, order and good governance of the area. So in thinking about that, I do think community engagement is incredibly important, and if we're not doing that thoroughly and deeply, we can't accurately represent that community. I know we're elected to represent them, but I like to represent them accurately and in real time. So it is really important that we are listening and putting a major focus on the community tier of local government to connect with that community and hear them, listen to them, not just tell them that we know what's best and we'll just go along and we'll vote for it and organise it for them because you voted us in to do that. That's not a very professional approach in my opinion. And I think it goes on to outline that, everything in between up until section 351, and believe me, it's no short read, and especially when you're aligning with what we do on a daily and the type of strategies and plans that we use. It goes all the way to section 351, which is administration of the Act. And this states the administration of the Act is assigned to the Minister of Local Government, and the department responsible to the Minister for Local Government in relation to the administration of the Act is the Department of Environment and Land Management. Considering what's occurred in hindsight, my own observations and what we're trying to clearly achieve here, I'm concerned about our specific team leading this high-level specific task at a workshop on a whim by plucking out multiple choice core and non-core businesses. In effect, we're deciding on how to interpret the Act, and some of us clearly can't effectively do that yet. And we're going to need to be doing it in a modern world, so well after the Act was designed. That doesn't say that those principles and those sections in the Act can't be applied and interpreted in this modern world correctly. We have evidence-based best practice, the uni are great for that, TASCOS are great for that. We can grab those individual pieces of information and work in a more holistic and cohesive way without having to have aldermen just pluck them out of the air and go, this is how we do it. We need to be thinking about, what kind of measures and balances we're putting in place. And many sectors and industries, including the legal profession even, rely on various kinds of overarching governance structures and details such as underpinning principles, models, strategies, plans. I can go on, prescribed information standards, all of that, but many more. And they don't only tend to expand on the issues presented here as assessed and prioritised. I've had to do it in several jobs. I think a lot of people that work in fast changing dynamic areas of work, which I know a lot of our staff here today do in upper management. So don't get me wrong, I'm all for improvements of this kind. I'm also aware my role isn't to simply agree for the sake of it or sit here quietly and I suppose looking not so pretty these days. But it's to critically reflect and challenge as a team together cohesively would be preferably, but I do feel like I'm on my own quite a lot, and it was a bit of an alleluia to hear your statement tonight, Sue. It's very refreshing, thank you. So my questions, I suppose, in conclusion is, have we gone out and assessed the evidence-based information on the issue or consulted the community in the past where we can use this tangible information and have that provided to us? You know, and by an evidence base, I mean reports, experts leading in the area such as allocated minister that I mentioned before, considering it's his role, for one, and economic and community research leaders found at places like Utas and Tascos who are quite vocal and open with their information, as well as better performing councils who are already doing this well. And two, what have we been doing all of this time up until now? Are we only just now, the first council in the state, working towards getting it right, so to speak? That's what, you know, leads me to be wondering about that. As I know of a few European countries that have proven their worth in community and economic outcomes and are leading in the OECD ranks. And there are a few Aussie ones as well, a few in Melbourne and Sydney and places like that are doing really well. And I think that instead of, to me, it seems, I suppose, you know, very short-sighted to just sit down and think that we have the ability and capacity to pluck those out of the air and decide what's core and non-core business via a multiple choice email. So that's a bit disappointing for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, do you need me to ask the questions again?
Oh, sorry, I thought I just took them as hypothetical questions, but you would like me or the
Yeah, sorry, there's lots of content to it, lots of things going on in my brain at the moment around that. I didn't know where to, I'd be here all day with questions, but have we gone out and assessed the evidence-based information on the issue or consulted the community in the past? And if so, can we have this information provided to us? And have we looked at better performing councils, Utas, Tascos, and what their suggestions, research and recommendations are around how a council functions really, really well, successful ones?
Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to answer those questions to my knowledge and then defer to the General Manager to add context. So I guess, have we gone out and assessed the evidence-based information and engaged with the community on, I think what you're referring to mostly in your contribution to the debate there is around the core services element of this report.
No, it's about assessing a council, about reassessing the whole council. It's about the item, the item
Sure.
that we're
So
debating.
a service review.
Yep.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of the consultation we've done with our community in recent times around budget and priorities of council, that has provided us certainly with some insight into what the community considers to be the priorities for this council, and the feedback provided through that engagement has been included obviously as an attachment to the report. In terms of the broader consultation with other experts to gather that evidence base you're talking about, I guess no. This is the first step in this process, so potentially that would form part of the process, but depending on the scale and the scope of the review, which is, I guess, what the General Manager will bring back to us in recommended terms of reference for the review, and perhaps to some extent on the broader level is what is being undertaken right now by the Local Government Board in reviewing the role and function of local government broadly in Tasmania, as the General Manager referred to in the report as well. So that's how I would answer that question. Anything further to add, General Manager?
In relation to community engagement, Council did an extensive work of community engagement with the development of the community plan back in around about 2014-15, about 67 different community events and activities, extensive consultation about what the community saw as important for their future out to 2040. Now, not all of that, as I say in the bureaucratic babble in the report, not all of that is intended to be the province of council to deliver. But it does provide a very good understanding of what the community's aspirations are for Glenorchy. In relation to specific engagement around council services, we have undertaken past community surveys to gauge, in a more clearly we did an indicative one around the current budget process, which is in the papers tonight. But we have previously done work with marketing, marketing research organisations to provide more statistically significant information on the community's attitudes to the services we provide. The last of those is probably, I'm thinking it's probably around the 2015-16 mark. So it's getting a bit longer in the tooth now. In relation to the references around government oversight, I'm not sure that there is a Minister for Environmental Land Management anymore, so we probably have to check. I remember working under that department many years ago, but I don't believe it exists anymore. So I'd have to go back and look at the provisions there to see who the relevant minister might be now, who's the successor. And in relation to leading practice research, I guess we've seen a lot of work done in the past around council amalgamations and some modelling done as part of past amalgamation and local government reform processes within Tasmania. So we can certainly go back and revisit those as part of a literature review. And there's been some work obviously done in the past by the Southern Tasmanian Council's Authority in relation to that as well. The future of local government exercise at the moment and the reference to local government's functions expanding is simply a reflection of what the local government board is observing at the moment and putting in its comments. So yes, we can certainly, that's a sort of literature review would be the sort of stuff we would feed into this exercise. But as the Mayor rightly says, the purpose of this report is, we need to start the ball rolling. If the councillors have a will to start the ball rolling, we need to do that before we start investing significantly as an organisation in this exercise.
Yeah, I understand that. I would have, to be honest, to hear that happen after we've already had that multiple choice email go out to Alderman, I would have preferred that you'd done that research and come to us with a bit more intention and meaningful, I suppose, approach. And I understand the engagement happened way back. I think that's too long ago to know what our current community wants and how they'd like to prioritise things. And I think we also feed up to the government and the ministers and things, not just rely on them and the reforms to come down and just, I suppose that punitive measure of where we will tell you how to do it and it feeds down. I think it's important if we're willing, intelligent and dynamic that we go to them and say, hey, we can call out some of those things if they're wrong on the spot rather than take them back, let our community suffer, make those mistakes. We can say, hey, best practice is this. We've spoken to the leaders at Utas who are in politics. These people are prevalent in the area. Having just conversations and a coffee with those people and talking about what you're doing can be so valuable and important.
Thank you.
That we don't drive it on our own and take all of that job on our own. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Your second question was, what have we been doing up until now?
Yes.
And I guess we've covered some of that has been addressed in the report, but I guess I also reflect on the fact that most of us have been around this table for
I'm asking the GM too, I
now?
suppose, just in general, council, what has council been doing? If you can't answer it, maybe someone else can.
Well, I guess
Take it
we've
on
all been
notice.
here for 4 years, so we should be across what council has been doing. Those of us who have been around the table,
Yes.
be across what council has been doing up until now, and it has been a period most definitely of generating stability through council over that 4 years and recovering from some of the dysfunction that was apparent, and that's certainly been a necessary approach that we've been taking over that time, and there is now recognition around the table from what I'm hearing and what we've discussed through our budget workshops, that we've had some really robust discussion around as aldermen and with ELT, that now is time to move beyond that period of stability to change and growth as a council and refocusing our strategy. So that's how I'd answer that question.
I appreciate that and I'm very aware of that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Sims. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Carlton.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm happy to be supporting the amended recommendations tonight. Just listening to the debate and the discussion around the table, I've reflected what's happened around the table over the last 4 years, and certainly each time we go through a budget preparation, it's quite difficult because there's lots of things we want to do and we just don't have the funds available to do the things that we want to do for our community and the master plans that we have set and the vision that we've set for Glenorchy. And yes, there have been some shocks and some things that have, I guess, delayed our progress towards that goal of financial sustainability. But in terms of how much income we can generate as a council, we know that around 75% of that does come from rates, and even though we are forecasting to return to a surplus, I think in the 24-25 financial year, it's still not going to be enough to be able to do the things that we want to do or the vision that we've set for Glenorchy. There are so many things that we just have to say no to because we just don't have the resources. So along the theme of our earlier report tonight, which is around setting the vision for Glenorchy in the future, I think what we're doing here tonight is aligning the future of our council in terms of what we can, to make sure that our council actually fits in with what we can afford within the rates that we have available to us, given that is our prime source of income, while taking into consideration the impact on our ratepayers. So I think in terms of any business, you're always going to be having a look at what you deliver and how that's delivered, and are there better ways to do that, or what changes can we make to ensure that we are focusing on community priorities and improving council's financial sustainability. So I think this is actually a positive, and it has been a difficult 4 years. I think the staff have done an incredibly, it's been a huge job to get to the financial position that we're in. There's been a lot of costs, a lot of cuts that we've had to make, and this is about actually being able to move forward and be able to do those things that we want to do, but we can't do that without actually going through this proper review process.
Thank you, Alderman Carlton. Any further discussion? Alderman Richardson.
Thank you, Mayor. With increased costs and internal and external circumstances, councils across the state are struggling to deliver services while maintaining affordable rates for their ratepayers. Each local community has their unique requirements. Glenorchy has its unique needs. That's why we as aldermen have been elected to council, to ensure that those needs and expectations are met. Alderman Fraser mentioned poor decisions. To make good decisions, we need to be well informed, we need an understanding of what our focus should be and what our service to our community should be. If we haven't learned anything from the past, it's certainly that change needs to be carefully considered and strategically implemented. Should we consider to cut services, we need to know what impact would be on the lives, the livelihoods and futures of those associated with the services we will be cutting. The cost, we need to have an understanding of the costs and the implications. It would be absolutely stupid to do anything else. I'm in favour of not making any rash decisions, but approach this in a well-considered way. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Richardson. Any further discussion?
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
Have staff had any warning about this, or is this the first our organisation has heard about this on the agenda tonight?
General Manager?
So staff I've provided staff with a copy of the report and a copy of the attachment to the report. I've also arranged for staff sessions at the work centre, childcare centre, Benjafield Childcare Centre, and also here at the council offices on Thursday. We've also been in contact with the union and advised them of this upcoming recommendation to council, and understand that they will also be in contact with staff in relation to it.
And just further to that, I know that we just talked about, the Mayor raised about the upheaval that we had years ago, and it was around a similar process. What have we done to mitigate risk around that?
Well, there was a reference to the risks of these processes in the report to council, and I think they're well documented and speak for themselves. I guess if I can talk a little bit about those past processes.
That's what I'd like, yeah.
We had a management team restructure in February 2015 that saw 16 of the 20 senior management and manager positions spilt. That process cost near on $2 million, and we saw a loss of about 230 odd years of corporate knowledge go out the door overnight. As part of that was recommended by CT management, we also had a number of service level reviews that were undertaken beyond that. So we had a service level review of the work centre, we had a service level review of finance, and we had a service level review of our compliance area. The service level review of the work centre recommended that 6 of the 12 coordinators at the work centre be basically 6 positions go. When I became acting GM, I formed the view that that would basically destroy the capability of the work centre to deliver infrastructure for our community. So I stopped that, and we went into consultation with the coordinators group, and the upshot of that was, in fact, additional investment to provide supervisor positions to ensure that there was articulation between the manager and the coordinators, because at that stage, the way that the previous restructures had been done, it resulted in a 1-to-12 reporting ratio between the manager for the work centre and the coordinators there. So we interposed a level of supervision in between that to provide a better reporting ratio. So that was done in consultation with the coordinators at the time, but I took the view that if we had followed through on that particular recommendation, that we would have just effectively destroyed the capability of the work centre to deliver for the community. In relation to the finance recommendations, that was very much a review of the finance, really the staffing levels and organisation of the finance area. The then manager of finance and I met with the then general manager and indicated that we had a proposal for him about how we could make the area more streamlined. He said, no, too late, we're going to a service level review, and the service level review was undertaken, which resulted in no benefits to the organisation. The compliance area similarly had a service level review, resulted in no benefits to the organisation. The overall cost, clearly the organisation's spend on CT management was in the millions, but in relation to those particular service level reviews around the management team restructure and the 3 smaller service level reviews, we're talking about around about $500,000 of expenditure, not to mention the redundancy costs. There was also an earlier service level review in relation to our ICT function, and that recommended that we go to the cloud and engage in a couple of large ICT change processes, one around implementing a new, well, both were really cloud-based ICT projects. One of those failed, and I again pulled the plug on that one as when I came in as acting GM. But prior to that, there had been a restructure of ICT, which basically cleaned out ICT in advance of us going to the cloud. So we didn't have the capability in-house to I guess deal with the major ICT change projects that we had on the go at that time. It was basically a premature implementation of that particular project. So the reason why I've provided the report that I have to council is because I believe that it's important to do things differently from what was done last time. We could clearly say that we spent a lot of money. It wasn't very effective. There was an atmosphere of secrecy. Community wasn't consulted. And so, in my view, we need to remedy those things. So we need to consult with staff effectively. And so the point of letting staff know at this very, very early start part of the process is so that staff can be in from the ground floor. Secondly, it's important to consult our community, and I think we need to be looking at market research that's got significant reliability around it in terms of statistical significance, so that we can get a reliable understanding of the community's views around council service offering.
Just a point of order, General Manager, clarification on the $2 million redundancy. My recollection was there were two directors and 5 managers positions that were made redundant, which wasn't $2 million. Other people chose to take a redundancy because there was a pretty good package there. So they chose to leave at that point of time based on a package. Only 7 positions at that point of time were made redundant, and people had the opportunity to reapply, and then they had a 2-year period to find another job. So they weren't going to lose their job straight away, even though they were 2 years at the same pay potentially, and all those redundancies were factored into our cost of doing business as I understand it. So that $2 million that keeps being quoted, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, but the $2 million, 7 positions wasn't $2 million. A number of other people chose to take redundancies because the package was there and they chose to leave based on opportunity. So just in that, to be fair to what happened back then, I know the CT management cost was about $550,000 altogether, wasn't it? Something like
over $1 million.
Was it over $1 million, wasn't it?
Through you, Mayor.
I think the point is you're just making a point.
Excuse me, Alderman Sims.
that-
Deputy Mayor has the floor.
Well, he just
The General
come in,
Manager has the
yeah.
floor. This is not an open forum for debate.
Well, I'm waiting for an answer from the GM
Point of
on the
order.
question.
Please remain silent until you are asked to speak.
So all I was saying was a clarification from that.
Through you, Mayor. So in researching that question, I went to the Tasmanian Audit Office's report into CT management procurement. So there was a performance audit undertaken, and that performance audit indicates that nearly $2 million was expended in redundancies. So
It was expended in redundancies,
I'm
yes.
quoting the Tasmanian Audit Office's figure.
But all I'm saying is people chose to take redundancy. 7 positions were made redundant, and then other people chose to take a redundancy. So that's all I'm suggesting. It's not that they were forced to take a redundancy, they
How
chose.
it's couched, how it's phrased, I guess,
Yeah.
is what is the point of difference, or the point of what you're raising there is about how it's phrased, is that through the provisions that were on offer through that process, that was the financial cost,
That was the
regardless
financial
of
cost. At the end of
how
the
it
day,
came
that's
about.
16 of the 20 senior manager positions were filled.
Sure, thank you, General Manager. Before I go to Alderman Hickey with your hand up, does
Can I
any other
continue?
Alderman?
I still was having my question answered.
Excuse me, Alderman Sims.
And you all
have
just
the
had an
floor.
argument
I'm the
instead.
chair of the meeting.
You're not doing a very good job of it.
Respectful, please.
Yes,
Well,
please.
first-
I'd like that both
first
ways.
warning,
Thank
Alderman
you. Thank
Sims.
you.
Before Alderman Hickey asks a question, would any Alderman who haven't yet spoken to the item like the opportunity to contribute to the debate? Alderman Dunsby.
It's been a very passionate debate. We've had some really good information before us. This document here, it gives us the dilemma of why we have to wear our hat for governance. We have the understanding of our community. We understand many of the issues that were raised by Alderman Fraser, but this is a guiding document for us from a governance perspective. We've challenged Tony and the staff over every year to find savings, and they've scrimped and scraped for many years, and we can't go on. We do have to find a new way and a new model. This needs legs to do it. This is the document to do it. I don't think about the election cycle, and I don't believe that should be part of that report at all. If we need it now, and it should be continuity that people will pick up if the body changes after the elections. I don't think that should stop and start our business. I think that if it needs doing, we do it now. There have been areas where we see the budget is looking reasonable, and I'm hoping there's enough flexibility in the budget that we can accommodate the cost of this report, which we'll have an idea at the next meeting. But if we don't do something now, we won't exist. So I think everybody's contributed really positively with all the information to the debate, and some of the information on the previous matter as well. I didn't actually write down some notes, but they are very relevant to this discussion as well. So I'll be supporting this going forward, and I think anybody whose aspirations are to join council should read this document and understand that what we have and what we have to consider to deliberate is contained in that document there from a governance perspective.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Any further contribution? Alderman Hickey.
Yes, I'd just like to follow up on the general manager's, 230 years of lost intel.
Sorry, Alderman Hickey, do you have a question?
Yes, it is a question. I'm questioning the general manager's reference to losing 250 or 230 years of intel because 2 directors and 5 managers were recommended for redundancies. Would we, general manager, you're stating it's $2 million related to that. We've had a discrepancy argument from someone who was present at the time as well. And what I'm asking is, had we not made the 2 directors and the 5 managers redundant, forgetting all the others, would we still be paying for them? And were they ever replaced, as in needed to be replaced? So in other words, we made a tough decision, well, them, made a tough decision. These people were paid out and given new opportunities to go and work for someone else, and otherwise there'd be an ongoing cost. Is that not the case? Question mark.
So thank you for the question. The first question I'd need to take on notice and just go back and provide you with more detail in relation to that. That's the number that was quoted at the time. In relation to the second question, that really relates to what was I guess the restructure process. So we started off prior to the 2015 corporate restructure with 5 senior managers and 15 managers. After that process, we shrunk to 3 directors and 10 managers. And then when I became acting general manager and I brought and subsequently was confirmed as general manager, I brought a report to one of the early meetings of this council recommending an organisational structure repair project, which created 4 directors and 12 managers. And the reasoning for that organisational structure repair project was documented in the report at the time. But essentially what had happened under the previous restructure was that the jobs were scrambled in quite a zany way. And so there was a need to create more rational portfolios for each of the directors and managers. And there was also simply a need for more boots on the ground. So, and I should add that we're currently at this stage at a 4 director, 11 manager model. So we're actually less than what the organisational structure repair project recommended to council.
Well, may I ask another question, Mayor? It relates to the fact that we have a lot of unfilled positions, which have been unfilled to control budgetary costs. Is that correct?
Oh, there's a range of. So the situation with unfilled positions is that pretty much every vacancy that occurs in the organisation, because of the need to save money, pretty much every vacancy needs to go to ELT for review, and we ask that the relevant managers advise us whether the position is needed ongoing or whether whether we need to fill it. So we are undertaking that level of scrutiny with every position to keep a lid on employee costs. The reality is that we start each year with our enterprise agreement. We start each year with a cost escalation of around about $1.25 million if we do nothing with employee costs. So we have take out of that a certain vacancy rate that occurs each year, which we estimate to be in the order of about 300,000. We're still roughly $900,000, going up by $900,000 a year, because of our enterprise agreement obligations, which we are not in a position to do anything about. They're numbers that are locked in from previous enterprise agreements.
So may I ask another question? What is that as equivalent of a rate rise, 900,000?
Well, we work on the basis that you're looking at around about $380,000 in expenditure equates to a 1% rate increase. So what we're trying to do is basically hold, and we know this is hard for staff because staff feel but what I guess this is a long way of answering your question. I'm not saying that we're deliberately delaying filling positions right across the board to make these savings, because we certainly fill these positions as and when required. So we're not deliberately restraining that, but we are asking directors to restrain some of those, bringing some of those forward where we can. But we're not doing any sort of blanket vacancy control in the sense of everything blindly can't be filled for 6 months or anything like that.
So, General Manager, as a question, because that's the nature of what I have to do, I have to try and frame this as a question. To give staff stability and comfort and good career opportunities going forward, would it not make sense to bite the bullet and look at the non-core functions that are competing in the private sector that we don't need to do, and then make sure all the staff know they've got a good, secure career here? Because we want to be an employer of choice, but we are not able to give them that security or comfort, or we keep them under so much pressure because we are running little business units we don't need to touch? Question mark.
I guess, and I can have a go at answering that, General Manager, if I may. Or will you go?
I was just going to say that that's the very purpose of the May report.
So why haven't we done it 4 years ago? Question mark.
Okay. Thank you, Alderman Hickey. I think we've already answered that, and some of us who have been here through that 4-year period reflect on the number of challenges and things that we have achieved over that time, and it's important to recognise the path to stability that we have been on and has been really important for us to be on. Any further discussions of the item? I will speak to the item before I move back to the mover, Alderman Fraser. I acknowledge and appreciate the contributions around the table. It's really important that we acknowledge the efforts of the General Manager in providing this report to us at Council, following what has been, although I know Alderman Hickey suggests that she has been raising this for some time now, really in the context of what we've been through in a by-election back in July, and the new council being established, and learning how to work as a council and with the General Manager and ELT, the context of some of the other challenges we've had through COVID, and some other major project challenges that we've had over that time, that really these conversations around this need to refocus our priorities as a council and understand what the priorities of the community are, and find this path to financial sustainability and ensuring we can sustain and renew our assets as set out in our asset management plan, have really only been relatively short in the broader context of things. I agree with Alderman Richardson that overall, in the broader scheme of things, the path recommended by the General Manager is a sensible one to take. I hear the sentiment around the table that there is a sense of urgency, and believe me, I feel that too. If we could make well-informed decisions tomorrow and put ourselves on a more sustainable financial footing, then I would be the first one to say, let's do that. However, we simply don't. For whatever reason, we can't go back through history. We can't change what's happened over the last 4 years or what hasn't happened over the last 4 years. All we have control over is now and going forward in the future. And that's all we can direct the General Manager to do, and that's what the essence of this report is. I note Alderman Fraser's comments around imploring the General Manager to find any low-hanging fruit for this upcoming budget. You know, we are in the process of setting our draft budget for 2022-23, and I echo those sentiments that it is really important as we have these ongoing conversations about what that budget looks like, that we identify anywhere that we can tighten the screws or consider, is there anything that we cannot do or do differently, so that we can ensure, as I keep raising, that we can fully fund our asset management plan renewal requirements. We have a long-term financial management plan and an asset management plan that sets out how much we need to invest each year to properly renew our footpaths, our roads, our recreation facilities, the things that community see as really some core services of council, and that we have the core responsibility to make sure are renewed as per our plans that we have and councils before us have endorsed and signed up to. We have been not investing adequately in our asset management renewal over the last decade, perhaps even longer, and we've seen some of the impacts of that on the city, some areas of the city looking tired and footpaths not being renewed. We can't continue to do that. We must find a way this budget and in future budgets to make that happen, in my view. So as Alderman Fraser's comments, and we will continue to work with the General Manager and the Executive Leadership Team to find a way to get this next budget as sound as possible without significantly increasing rates, and is always the challenge. I know that we are not the only council in this position. There's articles in the Examiner or Advocate today around the conversations that Burnie Council are having in relation to financial sustainability and looking at increasing rates by 4.7% or something. Launceston City Council's looking at 3.75%. Councils all across Tasmania have sustainability issues, and councils all across Tasmania have been impacted by COVID. And so I think we mustn't forget that whilst, yes, back 4 years ago, we increased rates by 12.5%, as Alderman Fraser mentioned, with the view to putting us on a financially sustainable footing. We couldn't foresee the COVID pandemic happening, and that did have an impact on our long-term financial management plan. I want to make it really clear that us considering this as a council and looking at our services that we offer is no reflection on the value of services that we provide or the roles and functions of the staff at this council. We, and I think I speak on behalf of all of our aldermen, value and respect the role that each and every staff member plays at this council, and we value, as does our community, the breadth of services that we offer. But the reality is that it looks like we simply can't keep doing more and even the same with less. As our costs go up, unless we continue to increase rates quite significantly, we just can't continue to do everything that we've been doing. And that really is the essence of what we've been asking the General Manager and the Executive Leadership to consider, to make recommendations to us as a council on what are core services. And quite clearly, there's some conjecture around that. The Local Government Act, I respectfully disagree with Alderman Sims that some of us can't effectively interpret the Act. I think some of us would take offence to that in fact, the role and function as prescribed in the Local Government Act is quite broad, and that is one of the reasons why this review of the local government sector is happening right now. I note that the functions of local government and the General Manager's report notes that they're broadening into social and community services. I think the reflections of the local government review is not necessarily considering whether these functions need to be done or not, but exploring whether local government is the right vehicle to perform these functions. I think that's some of the conversation that we too are having around the table as aldermen, and I think important that the community and each of us aldermen individually take the opportunity to provide our views to the local government review, because we do have some diverse views around the table on that matter. We have, through our discussions at budget workshops, been imploring and empowering the GM and ELT to make recommendations to council about how options for us to make decisions about services and service levels. Quite clearly, what is coming back to us is the recommendation that needs to be carefully informed and carefully managed with context of what's happened in recent times coming out of the dysfunctional period that this council had, and on reflection reflecting on where we've come over the past 4 years and how we can do it properly as a council and through engagement with our community, so that every voice has an opportunity to be heard. I know we are doing activity-based costing by June, and the report talks about having that information by June, which will be a helpful and important part of this review. So again, comments about why haven't we got this information already? We simply haven't. It's not helpful to reflect on that we should have or could have, because we just don't. But what we do know is that we are getting it, and we are committed to gathering that information and acting on it as a council. So trying to place blame or shame on people isn't helpful in these sorts of conversations.
Critical reflection.
Yes,
Not
Mayor,
shame in
I
you.
take offence at
Point of
that.
order, because none of this would be happening if I hadn't been screaming from the rooftops. So
Well-
I don't think that's fair.
Well, I disagree with that respectfully.
Where has it been done before
So-
we started asking? for
Order, thank you. I have the floor.
Okay.
So that is closing debate on that, and I again thank the General Manager for putting this report together based on the conversations we've had to date. It perhaps doesn't necessarily provide the actual specific recommendations that some of us were hoping for to make some decisions at this next budget. But we continue to work for this next budget to make some change and minimise the impact on our community for this coming year. And I echo Alderman Richardson's comments about the importance of engaging with our community, which many of us talk about the importance of, to make sure that they're heard through this process as well. So back to the move by Alderman Fraser.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to start with a question to the General Manager, fairly direct personal question, really, about whether Tony is himself personally convinced that this review is in fact necessary.
General Manager.
So that's a good question. I guess my personal journey with this organisation has been through the difficult times of council dysfunction and through those failed service level reviews in the past. I think in reflecting on council's current service offering, that service offering has grown organically over many years, and it's occurred with the council of the day's imprimatur and endorsement and resourcing. It is a unique response to the needs that council has perceived there are for providing local government services to the Glenorchy community. There's been a lot of discussion around core and non-core services, and as Alderman Sims said, it is a convenient shorthand. But in fact, when you look at the Act has enabling provisions around services and functions. So there isn't really such a thing as core and non-core, but effectively it's shorthand for discretionary, non-discretionary. I guess there is a level of personal investment in having worked with staff and built up morale from a broken organisation that we had, 2018, to a situation where we had been building the confidence of the staff in this organisation, and we've certainly gone through a recent process around staff values, and we talk about we respect each other, we are trusted, together we are better, and we deliver. So those are the values that we've been talking to our staff about, and we're not a perfect organisation by any means, but that's our aspiration around those values. So what I've undertaken to staff is that I would want to see those values implemented in any future process. So from my perspective, what I've put forward to you tonight has been formulated with much struggle because of the investment I have in the staff, and I know that the calibre of the staff that we've got, including in some of these so-called non-core areas. But what I've put on the table is my recommendation. I stand behind my recommendation. I know there have been amendments made to the recommendation. As General Manager, I'm duty bound to carry out the the resolution of the council, and that will be undertaken. So I guess in response to what you're saying, I personally think from a timing point of view, it's better to do it not in the kind of heady atmosphere of a pre-election period, but rather to do it after that, after the dust has settled and there's a new council on board. But I also understand the commentary around the table and the views of the council about that. So I've simply put my recommendation forward in terms of what I believe is my, without fear or favour, my recommendation for what we should do. If council believes that that it wishes to take a slightly different course on that, then it is open to them, and it's my duty and the duty of the staff to undertake that.
So just to clarify, in response to Alderman Fraser's question, is the review necessary in your opinion in its entirety, yes or no?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what I was
I believe, yeah, so, sorry, okay. So,
I mean, do you personally support this? Or do you feel like it's being forced upon you by the Alderman?
I think that we're in a situation where the council is restrained around rates, and so I think from a staffing point of view, we would say we'd like to see more rating effort from the council, but that clearly is not going to come from the council. Our expenditure, and I've looked very hard at our historic expenditure, our expenditure has been very modest. In fact, if you look at our nominal materials and services expenditure, it's declined by 17.7% over the last 10 or 11 years. So people are trying to do more with less. So the bottom line is our major income item is rates. A major expenditure item is employee costs. We've got enterprise agreement obligations. We can't do anything about. We can't suddenly cut people's salaries. We've got to maintain their conditions. So we have nowhere to go except services, and from that perspective, services is the way to go.
Thank you, General Manager. Back to close debate. Alderman Fraser.
Yeah, if you would, I probably would have preferred a more direct yes or no answer there. I understand that you were tiptoeing around it, but I would make the initial comment that this sort of review is unlikely to be successful if the General Manager is not 100% behind it, and his executive leadership team as well. Because it's up to you, it'll be up to you guys to also convince the employees in the council that it's necessary as well. Because, you know, I love Alderman Hickey's passion and her ability to call it as she sees it. I think they're wonderful qualities, but I would temper some of what she said there, because I personally anyway, really want to avoid creating an adversarial relationship between the Alderman and the executive leadership team, and between the Alderman and the council staff. I mean, we all need, and that's part of why the previous restructure went wrong so badly, I think, from what I've read. You know, you just want to do everything to avoid that situation. But it is a difficult situation. As I said earlier, you know, the report felt like there's a real reluctance in the organisation for any change at all, to be honest. And it was quite heavy on the risks, but there's virtually nothing about the potential benefits. And there are potential benefits. But there's not a lot of that talked about in the report. So I would perhaps encourage people to look at the benefits. I understand that people are initially probably fearful because there's change. They're worried about their positions, they've got mortgages and things like that. I'm personally confident that there is so much demand for skilled people in this sector at the moment that I don't think anyone who is good at their job in local government needs to be too concerned about finding employment opportunities in the future. I really don't. But again, I reiterate, if this is ever going to be successful, you as General Manager need to be 100% behind it. You need to understand why it's necessary and believe it's necessary, and you need to convince your executive leadership team and the rest of the organisation that it's necessary as well. Otherwise, it won't work. It just won't. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. Put the recommendation to the vote. Alderman Fraser's closed debate. Alderman Bull.
Does that need to be changed at all, or is that?
That is the
That is
the
I haven't
motion.
had a chance to speak yet, Mayor.
I did ask, was there any further? I did
Sorry.
before I spoke to the motion, but debate's been closed, so
Can reopen it.
I do apologise. Can I reopen debate, General Manager?
It's just a general comment from what the General Manager said. Thank you for that. I disagree. I don't think it is something that we should leave to a new council. I think it's something that this current council should be able to resolve with the cooperation of the staff and fellow aldermen. But I just want to say my piece in regard to that. But I think it's something I would not like to see carried over to a new council. I'd prefer it to be answered and taken care of prior to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Ball. Anything further to close debate on that point? Alderman Fraser.
Thank you.
I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are for. That is carried unanimously. Moving on to item 11, draft dog management policy. The recommendation that council approve the dog management policy 2022 in the form of attachment 1. Do I have someone to move this recommendation, please? Alderman Hickey, someone to second. Alderman Ball. Alderman Hickey.
I don't have a lot to say on this particular item, but you'll be pleased to know. But I am thrilled that it has been reviewed, and as each and every policy and every piece of work of this council needs to be reviewed regularly. Thank you. So in the interest of good government, I will support it.
Thank you, Alderman Hickey. Any further discussion on the item?
Just like to make a comment through the Mayor, if that's all right. It's really interesting the amount of engagement we get with these types of policies when it's a dog or something like that. So maybe we need to think about attaching the word dog to some other things, or maybe thinking about some of those strategies we're using to attract people to engage. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Sims. Any further discussion of the item? No? I agree with Alderman Sims's comment. We had 86 responses to a consultation and 2 opportunities for comment for the public to provide feedback. Also, the engagement of a targeted reference group, and we had representation from the Dogs Home, from the RSPCA, the Tasmanian Canine Defence League, the Dogs Tasmania, Hobart Dog Walkers Association, and the Australian Veterinary Association Tasmania District, as well as representatives from a number of areas of council. So I'd like to just give a shout out to those representatives who were involved in the targeted reference group, because it certainly added another level of engagement with our community and with key stakeholders on this policy, and particularly the Hobart Dog Walkers group provided quite significant feedback and took the time to fastidiously review the draft policy and all of the areas that are restricted, not restricted, non-lead and off-lead, and make comment on that. So I'm very grateful for that. I'm particularly pleased that our changes in our policy go beyond what is contemplated in the legislation and in allowing assistance dogs to access both restricted areas and prohibited areas, and makes a statement in commitment to recognising the vital support that assistance dogs provide to people with disabilities in our community. So we will continue to advocate to the state government for changes to the Dog Control Act to recognise assistance dogs as the Federal Disability Discrimination Act does, noting that the significant support that they provide and the feedback that we received, quite a high volume of feedback from our community through the consultation on that particular issue.
Just a question here for me. Where are we at with that? We had any response back?
No, not as yet. We're waiting for the draft policy to be endorsed, or the policy to be endorsed before we write to the Minister. So I will do that now.
You've not had any sort of general conversation?
Not at this stage, no. I know it's something that the RSPCA are having ongoing conversation with the state government about, and in our last targeted reference group meeting, they said certainly council adding their voice will contribute to this, to this conversation and potentially reinvigorate it as well. So I think that would be great. The targeted reference group also have sought I guess, to continue on as the targeted reference group. So I understand that's something that we are looking into, and perhaps will be brought back to council in a relatively soon date in the near future to consider whether they can continue on as a group just to talk about dog management issues and more broadly Glenorchy as a dog-friendly city into the future. Any further discussion of the item, Alderman Ball?
Thank you.
No further discussion of the item. Back to you, Alderman.
Well, as a mother of 2 dogs, I am a dog lover, but I was pleased to see in this report that dangerous dogs are getting a higher fee, and personally I'd like to see them banned from the state, but I don't guess that's not going to happen. But anyway, I would like you to put this to the vote because I think it's a good report.
Thank you, Alderman Hickey. Put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you're for. That is carried unanimously. Item 12, Quarterly Report, Quarter 3, 2021-22. We have a recommendation that Council receive and note Council's Quarterly Report and Quarterly Annual Plan Progress Report for the quarter ending 31st of March 2022. Do I have someone to move this recommendation, please? Alderman Dunsby, someone to second. Alderman Fraser. Alderman Dunsby.
Thank you. 3/4 of the way through our financial year, and we see we're currently showing a favourable result of 2.61 million against the budget. And most of the indicators there in the explanations that have been provided cover for the ups and downs that are there, but say currently showing a favourable result. There's nothing that I could particularly identify I want to ask questions on, so I'm happy to throw it open for other people's comments.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Carlton.
Thank you, Mayor. Just start off with a comment if that's okay. I note that for this particular report, we now see capital work split into all programs excluding grant funded. So we're now able to track how council is going with our standard capital works, and to also see in a separate part of the report the grant funded. So the report does note that we are possibly not going to spend the full amount this year due to largely factors outside of council's control. So I had a question in regards to what are the implications in regards to that. So if we don't spend what we forecast in this financial year, what are the implications for those particular programs and the likelihood of making that up in next financial year?
Thank you, Alderman Carlton. General Manager.
So in relation, just to clarify, Alderman Carlton, are you talking about the renewal budget, or are you talking about capital works, CapEx generally?
So we see CapEx broken into all programs that exclude the grant. So that's on page 14 of the quarterly report. And there is a comment in there around due to contractors and the like, were unlikely to spend the amount that we thought we would spend on council's capital works program. In terms of the grant funded, which I'm assuming are things like the KG5 and those sorts of things, we're now able to see those separately, which is something that I'm pleased to see has come through.
Yeah, so in relation to the major projects, clearly there's been a delay in being able to finalise funding agreements due to the need to rescope those projects with the COVID cost escalation, and pleased to say that those major projects now have been funding agreements for the soccer package and for the Giblins play space have been finalised. So as you heard earlier in the meeting, that's being pursued for procurement. So we will be able to move on that, but that's clearly happening later in the financial year than we were anticipating. In relation to the renewal budget, I might just ask the acting director just to provide a little bit more background, but we generally monitor that on an ongoing basis, and we have an internal team that reallocates projects where possible to maximise our spend.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you. Yeah, we have a monthly meeting where we continually look at the spend on the capital works. If it's flagged early that a project is unlikely to go and finished, we have a process where we can bring in the next cab off the rank if it's a renewal project like a reseal. If there's something that's not going to be able to get done before the end of the financial year, then that would most likely happen in the following financial year, which means it takes the place of another project. In terms of the spend on our normal capital works, so we talk about our renewals, I understand the curve hasn't matched what was projected because there's been some delays. Firstly, on reseals with the wet weather prior to Christmas, and then there's obviously been crews out in COVID and things like that. But we're talking to the capital works crews, they're pretty confident that they're still going to get the vast majority of those projects completed.
Okay, thank you. And just in regards to the section on risk, I note that there's been a new risk that's been added to the register. So on page 32 of the quarterly report, so I don't know what page it is in the attachment. That's just in regards to, sorry, it's a one new list that has been reopened in the past quarter, and that is inadequate oversight of landfill operations, which results in a breach of EPA requirements. So just wondering if you might be able to give us a bit more detail around that particular risk. It's a new risk, but it's a reopened risk.
Through you, Mayor, I'm not familiar with the detail of that, but generally it relates to matters like leachate control.
I might be able to help you there, Jenny. Common Services, the risk was reviewed and closed when it shouldn't have been. So identifying the risks is an ongoing basis, so it's been reopened and put back where it should be, so we can continue to monitor it.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further, Alderman Carlton?
No. Yes, sorry. Just in regards to the annual plan, so we get an update, a progress update, and that gives us an indication on how we're tracking in some of the key areas. And I just wondered if we could just get a bit more of an explanation on the implement the community strategy. So I've got an excellent update around what's happening in that particular space. It does say that we're 25% behind where we said we would be, but there isn't an explanation as to why that might be the case. So I can see things are happening, but most of the other actions have some extra information as to why that's not quite tracking. So no doubt there's a good reason for it. It's just not clear in that particular report. So I'm hoping the director might be able to provide that extra information tonight.
Thank you. Director David Donaldson.
Thank you, Mayor. Through the Mayor, thank you for the question. As you say, I'm just reading the fine print of that now, Alderman. The clear reason for that has been simply we've just had some key staff moving around and haven't been able to put them in the right place at the right time. I've actually spoken with the manager today about rectifying that and getting that back up to speed by the end of this current financial year.
Thank you. Thank you, Director. Any further discussion of the item? No, I will note some of the key highlights. It is quite a dense report, so I think it's important to reflect on some of the things that we have achieved or delivered on over the last quarter. We have significant work underway on the new cell at our Jackson Street landfill to extend the life for 10 to 20 years. The Edie Street Rec Ground building is at lock-up stage and on track to be completed by, I think, June this year. Around that time, we put the tender out for the Giblin Street Reserve project. The procurement's progressing on the skate park at Montrose Bay, hopefully commence in June this year. We finalised a funding agreement for the North Chigwell Oval and KG5 projects, which is a significant milestone to achieve. Now we can hit the ground on those projects. We've been collaborating closely with Sorrel Council and with the BMX Club on the BMX relocation. We've undertaken work ongoing on CBD safety We've had continual funding announced for the Jobs Hub. We've had a Jobs Fair held with 1,200 people attending. Commenced investigations into the disposal of land to release 10 hectares potentially of rezoned land for residential purposes in Austin's Ferry. We resolved to declare Glenorchy a refugee welcome zone, adopted the Glenorchy Park master plan, did our consultation on Cityscape, and commenced consultation also on some other policies on nature strips and pop-up food vans. We come to a resolution on the long-standing issues with Glenorchy District Football Club. We've held some pop-up chats at Northgate and scheduled community yarns. We had 69 new registrations on our Let's Talk Glenorchy page, meaning we have around nearing to 1,000 in total. We had 149 development applications to assess, 118 building applications and 83 plumbing applications. So significant work going on, and also work at the Barry Street Reserve Playground to renew some of the infrastructure there. So lots going on to deliver on the ground for the people of Glenorchy over the last quarter, and we look forward to continuing that through to the end of the financial year. Any further discussion of the item? Go back to the mover, Alderman Dunsby. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you're for. Carried unanimously. Item 13, submission to the Future of Local Government review, and we have a recommendation that Council make a submission to the Local Government Board about the Future of Local Government review in the terms set out in this report, and provide a copy of its submission to the Local Government Association of Tasmania. Can I have someone to move this recommendation, please? Alderman Fraser, someone to second. Deputy Mayor, Alderman Fraser.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, look, I've had a really detailed read through the draft submission that's been written by council officers, and I agree with just about everything they say. The start of the submission, I guess, is setting the context for what the Glenorchy City Council's experience has been over the past few years trying to deliver its services, and I think that's a good thing for the board to hear. And I think some of the recommendations around, changes to the way planning potentially could be dealt with are quite smart. What else have we got in there? Some of the inherent conflicts of interest that aldermen have to deal with when they sit on a planning authority. All of those sort of things are really important things to reiterate with the board and make them aware of. I like some of the ideas around increased efficiency, as you might expect, pooling of common technologies and contracts and things like that. I think that is great. It's not getting much public interest from the media or anyone else, but in my view, this is probably a once-in-a-generation opportunity to change the way local government operates in Tasmania, and the changes that are recommended by the board will eventually float up to the Parliament and will result in changes to the Local Government Act. That is a good thing. The Act was 92, so it's, I think 92, so it's well and truly overdue for an update with contemporary times. I would like to see, and I know that the Minister for Local Government pointedly said that this is not about amalgamations or anything like that, and I do get that, but I would at least like to see at least a sentence in there that Glenorchy City Council would at some point in the future consider discussions on amalgamations with neighbouring councils in the interests of economies of scale and efficiency and all the other things that are discussed in there. But that's just my view. But I basically agree with most of the points that have been made in the submission. Would like to see that addition. I'll keep banging that drum while I have this little 15 minutes of fame sitting up here. But I fully support it, and I'll open it up to other people to talk about if they wish.
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Hickey.
Yes, I had the dubious honour of being part of amalgamation discussions after the Minister for Local Government, who at the time was Peter Gutwin, had addressed the local government forum and explained the ageing demographics, the inherent issues of sustainability in all councils, the fact that 29 councils for a population of, I think we were 510,000 back then, was complete over-governance. He funded various sections to sit down and talk to each other. So the greater inner Hobart City Councils, which was Hobart, Clarence, Glenorchy and Kingborough, were asked to come together and form some sort of marriage, and the findings were fairly high level, but they did indicate significant savings. But again, just like I see this, it all got bogged down in politics and nothing proceeded. So hundreds of thousands of dollars on various reports were written. Another time, an opportunity in time absolutely lost to have some sensible, rational discussions. And I think with two neighbouring councils, the decision to amalgamate was so obvious and it lost by one alderman's vote. And then they went on to share general managers for a while and then that didn't work out and stuff like that. So we just can't keep putting the burden of this over-governance on the people of Tasmania. At some stage, somebody has to do with Jeff Kennett, grab it by the throat and say, we need to rationalise local government. It cannot be done from within. It will never, no one's ever going to vote themselves out of office. You would, well, I would too, but
Rare, very rare.
let's hold hands and do it. But it just will not happen. And I've had 10 years witnessing call after call after call to have rational, even resource sharing. I remember pleading that Glenorchy and Hobart shared dog registrations, and I was told emphatically that there would have to be a body over the two councils created to make sure it was fair for both councils. And so I created another bureaucracy to do dog registrations. So heaven help us trying to do something serious like backroom payroll or any other sharing planners. Instead, we go through this farcical situation where there's a shortage of food hygienists or planners, and so everyone's poaching off everybody, and there's only a pool of X number of people. So I think there's huge opportunity for efficiencies of scale that would be beneficial, but somebody has to take the lead and bang the table and say it's going to happen. And I've never seen a brave government do it yet.
Thank you, Alderman. Any further discussion of the item? No. I'll speak briefly, just to say I think it's important that we as a council make a submission to the future of local government view. I know I personally will be making an individual submission to provide my own personal views. The approach that we're taking here as a collective council is to provide a submission that provides, I guess, some areas for consideration for the board more than providing really quite specific views one way or the other on issues, although it does provide some direction with the context that Alderman Fraser talked about of the experience of Glenorchy. So I appreciate the report the General Manager's put together to provide that approach in ensuring Council does make a submission at this early stage of the review. It'll be a 3-stage process, so there'll be further opportunities for Council to make comment depending on the initial findings of the board. And I implore all of our community members to have their say in what is, as Alderman Fraser said, a once-in-a-lifetime or once-in-a-generation perhaps opportunity to have a say about what the role and function of local government could and should be into the future with all things being considered. I'll go back to the mover, Alderman Fraser.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I too will be making an individual submission where I'll make my views about the potential for amalgamations clear. Yeah, I thank the officers for putting this submission together. I think it's makes some really excellent points.
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. I'll put the recommendations to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are for. That's carried unanimously. Moving on to item 14, procurement and contracts monthly report. We have a recommendation that Council receive and note the procurement and contracts monthly report for the period from 14th of March to 14th of April. Do I have someone to move this recommendation, please? Alderman Richardson, someone to second. Alderman Dunsby. Alderman Richardson.
Thank you, Mayor. 2 exemptions from 14th March to 14th April due to lack of supplies amounting to $263,112. One was for $205,000 for full gear motorcycle training program. This one has me intrigued. Can we have some detail around that? The other one was $58,000 for regional flood early warning systems. That I understand. The other one I don't.
Thank you, Alderman Richardson. A question for Director Ronaldson or
We did
Director?
receive a grant for funding for the program.
Oh, you received grant funding
Yeah, but I'll get,
and it just rolls
Director
over?
to discuss.
My apologies, Alderman, through you, Mayor, could you just repeat the question, please?
It was in relation to the exemption for the full gear motorcycle program. What is there? Not any other providers for that?
Oh, sorry, yes, there is only one provider, is the answer to the question. So when this was first investigated, there was only one supplier in the state, and we've and receiving I think we're up to the third amount for this particular grant scheme. There still continues to be one provider in the state.
And it was training for?
Our full gear.
This is a program called Full Gear, and it is to engage with, sorry, I'll use my outside voice, to engage with young people who are currently unlicensed, identified through a variety of means, who are riding unlicensed motorcycles in our municipality. It's working with that provider, a couple of community houses to bring them into the program. The officers work to train those young people to become more responsible in their usage of motorcycle riding. The end result is they get their licences and continue on a life of productivity as opposed to where it perhaps was heading previously. State government really liked this program. It was something that we developed in consultation with state government. They kept coming back and funding us, and we're now in the privileged position of having other local governments approach us to say, tell us more about how you did this. So really good success story. But again, so back to your question was, one provider in the state for it.
Good program, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
Director.
you.
Thank you, Alderman Richardson. Any further discussion of the item?
Sorry.
I will go back to move Alderman Richardson.
No, nothing else.
Put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand, indicate if you're for. That's carried unanimously. Moving on to item 15, notices of motion, questions on notice without notice. We have some questions on notice from Alderman Dunsby in relation to rabbit eradication, the intersection of Albert Road and Charles Street, Moona, and community batteries. And the answers have been provided in the agenda there. Are there any further questions without notice this evening? Alderman Fraser.
Yes, I have two. Thank you, Mayor. The first one relates to the old Claremont Primary School, where there was recently another fire. I know that's very close to where Alderman Dunsby lives. I couldn't help but notice a couple of comments on Facebook about the asbestos in that building being further degraded as it becomes more and more damaged. And I wondered whether the council was aware of any public health concerns around the asbestos in that building, whether in fact it is safe, whether that asbestos is blowing onto nearby streets. I know the actual building is centrally located in the land, but are there any public health issues related to that building? And if there are, is there any way that we can get this developer to hurry up with the development? Because it seems to be taking forever.
Through you, Mayor. So I don't know the specific answer to that question, but council has certainly in the past been actively involved in responding to vandalism and fire issues associated with that site, and council has expended money to basically ensure security safety in the past. I'm not sure whether the director has any further at this stage, no. So we'll take that one on notice and come back to council.
Thank you, thank you. Second question, I recently, and there's a bit of a preamble here before my question, Mayor, if you forgive me, but I recently wrote a letter to the editor about the crime that my family have been experiencing in West Moona over the last few years. And I was honestly overwhelmed with responses, many private responses from people who didn't want to be publicly noted for what they were saying. But, it's certainly, it's perhaps not yet showing up in the statistics, but it certainly feels like that there is an increase in crime in the city at the moment. And we've noted the antisocial behaviour in the front lawns, also illegal behaviour. The old adage that what gets measured gets managed came to mind, and I wonder whether the council has ever approached Glenorchy Police and asked whether they would be willing to provide the council and thereby the public a regular report on crime statistics within our municipality. My strong suspicion is that that's something that people would appreciate and be very interested in, and it will also give everyone a clear idea about whether in fact crime is increasing, what types of crime, and in fact whether, hopefully the opposite of that, when the crime starts to reduce somewhat. But my question is, could a council potentially approach Glenorchy Police and ask for a regular update?
Yeah,
Perhaps a
absolutely.
bi-monthly or something?
Yes. I'll answer the question first.
Oh, just add to, okay.
So Mark, yes, absolutely. We do have regular meetings with Inspector John Ward from Glenorchy Police, although we haven't in the last month or so. So it's about time we scheduled another one perhaps. And he does tell us about some of the statistics, certainly tells the General Manager offhand on crime but yes, absolutely, I'd be happy to ask that of him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming that they would create reports to that effect
They
on
do.
a fairly regular basis
That's right.
anyway. So
Yes.
as long as there's nothing confidential, I'm sure Glenorchy public would love to read it.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to take that question to Inspector Ward, Alderman Fraser. Any further questions, Alderman Fraser? Thank you. Alderman
In
King.
years gone by, the inspector used to come to council meetings.
That'd be great too.
And he was there and was happy to take questions.
Yeah.
And so that gave a lot of comfort to people.
Yeah.
And I think it's very appropriate if he was invited, well, the inspectors change fairly regularly. So each one has their own way of doing things, but I think it was really comforting.
So your question, Alderman King, is could we consider inviting Inspector Ward to a
Absolutely,
meeting?
that was my question.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a little bit tongue-tied at the time.
Any further questions without notice? Alderman Richardson.
Thank you, Mayor. This is in relation to new subdivision or new housing development off Abbotsfield Road runoff from the Brooker Highway. The new subdivision, they built a new fence that went straight along, faces the highway, and as soon as it went up, I thought to myself, that's going to be targeted, and it has. It's disgusting. The whole thing's, half of it's been smashed, the whole thing's graffitied on, and it looks so grubby. My question here, is there anything we can do about it? And longer term, is there anything we can do to avoid structures like this going up? Because you know they're going to be tagged. And it's so grubby.
Graffiti.
Graffiti.
Yeah. Thank you, Alderman Richardson. General Manager.
We have a graffiti crew that works to address graffiti of council-owned buildings and premises. However, I'm assuming this is an acoustic fence.
Yeah, probably is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll have to take that one on notice.
Yeah, I guess what you're asking, is there anything in the planning scheme perhaps that,
Well,
or anything we can do as a
something in place, even if we cover the thing up with a climber or do something or deter people from, I don't know, but
Anti-graffiti paint.
yeah, I've heard of that, but that's not so successful.
I think it just helps remove it rather than prevent
It's like a
graffiti going on
sealant,
there.
Yeah,
A sealant that seals and.
I know it's a problem everywhere, but so disappointing.
Take that on notice, Alderman Richardson. Thank you. Any further questions without notice? Alderman Sims?
Yes, just going back to our key functions around providing for health and safety, promoting for the interests of the community and representing them, peace and order, all that good stuff. I've just been, really critically reflecting on our role as an alderman and how that feeds into council and staff and the outcomes. And in looking at these and genuinely and critically assessing the public satisfactory levels for the outcomes of most key projects in the community, like the CBD revitalisation, things like the Historical Committee, KGV, BMX Club Move, all of these aspects that we're focusing on. I personally feel as an alderman we have a long way to go in connecting with our community and making the right moves. And I think many of the community believe the key functions aren't actively being lived to the standard we all deserve. And that's arguable, subjective. it's one thing to claim success or win an award like we just have for a recent project, and we also saw another council win a massive award for a project and then it got cancelled down the track, but they were still marketing the award as a win. So, I see a lot of that happen in government in general. I've seen that happen at our council. I've seen that happen at other councils. And I suppose I don't measure success on that, on awards and things. I measure success on talking to the local person sitting at the bar small, the person who's leading in our community sectors, dealing with the most vulnerable people on the street, and look at those outcomes as well. It's great to have the skill to be able to work in the grassroots, which I do, and have made a really big effort to do so, but also to understand the theory and the high level information as well, and be able to connect all those dots. And that's something I pride myself on. I've taught people how to do that, leaders in the state. So it's something that I'm quite familiar and passionate about, satisfactory and timely outcomes. And I suppose this leads me to ask, does the council believe that it should be facilitating or supporting the community in regards to aspects such as preserving our history through a formal council connected committee, something that we support and not necessarily facilitate, but show some support, I suppose promoting those interests of the community and going back to, I think it pretty much links to every key function in some way. And does council feel, it has a role around supporting our community cohorts such as this, other facilities and our local youth issues?
Thank you, Alderman Sims. General Manager, would you like to take those on notice?
Yes, please.
No worries, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Sims. Any other questions? Alderman Dunsby.
I'd like to ask a question about recognising our valued volunteers. I note from the council website there's no information about recognising our volunteers at an awards event that's usually held in May each year. Just my first part of this question, I have multiple questions actually, is has the recognition and the ceremony been cancelled?
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. General Manager, I'd like to defer to the Director or
I'll start the answer and then perhaps hand over to the Director. There's certainly been some work undertaken to investigate volunteer recognition, but perhaps in a different format this year. But I'll hand over to the Director.
Thank you, General Manager. Through you, Mayor. Exactly as General Manager just said, it's formulate what this year looks like, what we'll be, and we'll get some communication out shortly around that.
Why? Is my next question.
Sorry.
Why? Why are we not continuing with this tradition where we value our volunteers, where community organisations can put them forward for that recognition? None of them do it for that reason. And I'm only aware of it because I directed somebody to the website, said we have this way that we recognise our volunteers every year, and they said there's nothing there. And I looked and there's nothing there as well. So if there has been this change, why hasn't that been communicated to us as aldermen as well if there's such a significant change? Where has the decision come from? And I think it's a really important aspect that we have within our community. It has a budget, it has a timeline, there was an expectation it would happen, and now it's not happening, and I'm really not happy with this.
Thank you, that's been noted. Through you, Mayor. A meeting was held late Friday afternoon as to where that process is up to. The short answer has been we've had a 2-month gap in staffing personnel, which I referred to before around juggling around, and there was a meeting on Friday, late Friday afternoon, to say, well, given the time where we're up to, what does this year look like? So that's where we were as of 3 o'clock Friday afternoon.
So that would be 2 or 3 weeks out from when the event is traditionally held, usually mid-May.
Correct.
Yep. Okay, can I please request a report back to the next council meeting that will encompass all of this information, and so that we can be informed about it. I'm just going to say, on behalf of the many volunteers and community groups who nominate those humble superstars, I call them, who volunteer in our community every year and are recognised by these awards. And I've experienced some people, I had a gentleman who had an intellectual disability and he received one of these awards, and you have never seen the pride on his face when he pinned his badge down here, because he thought that's where he would put it, and he proudly wore that, didn't expect it, and we don't understand how this resonates for these people and what they do. The humble cup of tea lady gets her award for so many hours. In a few years' time, you're going to see she's running a community house or she's involved and done more, and people, you know, they come out of this, and every year we see this and the stories that come out of these awards. I'd be absolutely devastated if they did disappear off our calendar, and I will be lobbying hard to make sure that they're reinstated if that tends to be the case. Question mark.
So your question was, can I request a report to council meeting that will outline that information, or as the director said, there'll be a response coming to Alderman before that time, potentially information potentially coming to Alderman before that time, but we'll take those questions.
Perhaps my other question that I would add to that, if there's a way that we can make it happen, if it doesn't necessarily have to happen in May, which is traditionally Volunteers Month because of the staffing issue, and if we can still make it happen later in the year, I'd be very keen to see that happen, please.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Any further questions without notice? Alderman Hickey.
Can I congratulate Alderman Dunsby on raising that point, because I do think the volunteers of any community are the glue that holds us together. There's no government on this planet that can do all the jobs or get to the nitty-gritty like a volunteer can. So thank you. That's an important issue to be raised.
Thank you, Alderman Hickey, and the answer is yes.
Thank you.
Congratulate Alderman Dunsby on that question. Any further questions without notice? Do I have someone to move to close? Deputy Mayor, someone to second? Alderman Ball, the recommendation of the vote, please raise your hand to indicate if you're for. That is carried unanimously. So that ends the open component of our meeting at 8:31 p.m. Thank you, Mr. Steenbergen, for attending, and thank you to members of the public who have attended online to this evening's meeting. Stay safe, be kind to each other, and we will see you in a month's time.